Okay, we're live. Welcome to Dive into World Building. This is one of our regular topic discussions, which it's hard for me to go from the specially scheduled author discussions to like, oh right, this is when the regular scheduled hangout would start, so I should probably think of a topic for it. I'm starting to try to create my two models, and it's like, okay, challenging, but that's okay. Today we're talking about jobs, because jobs have been on my mind lately, and and I don't know. I think we're gonna have some fun here because there's a lot to talk about actually.
Yeah.
As I was trying to get my thoughts together for the hangout, I thought, well, you know what? With jobs, you've really got several different angles you could take on the problem, right? One is just that people in your world need something to do, right? Like, you can't be walking through a world and everybody's just sitting on their porch, right? Nobody's doing anything, right? And you don't want to feel like people only start doing things when your characters walk into a scene, which I have had that feeling occasionally with some things that I have read. Fortunately, it was a while ago. No, it wasn't in recent times. But so basically, giving people things to do so that they can be busy doing them while your characters are moving around. Then there also is giving your characters things to do, right? Because they probably wouldn't just be hanging out all the time. Then there's, of course, running the economy. If you've got a world, it's really critical, as we've discussed in previous hangouts, to have it work in a particular way, and there's going to be trade of some variety, and you got to keep people, you know, eating and wearing clothes, and those clothes and got to be made by somebody, and the food's got to be grown by somebody. So you've got these activities that people need to do in order to keep things running. And then, okay, so let's start with those. But the other two that I was thinking about were like unique jobs. Whether your world has a very specific type of job that occurs in it that doesn't occur in our world, or is critically different from the way that we would conceptualize the same job in the real world. And then, if we have time, we can talk about, you know, aspects of training and various kinds of things like that. So, I don't know. What do you want to do first? I think maybe talking about running the economy would be a good place to start. Even though I listed it third.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, yeah, it is pretty fundamental. So, lots. Have you ever read a book where this totally fell through and there was like no local economy and everybody was just sort of lounging around?
Most epic fantasy. Frankly.
Yeah?
Yeah, their job is just going on the quest.
Yeah, I mean, how often do you actually see, you know, an economy working in the background of an epic fantasy novel? They're notoriously bad for it. It's like because they have no understanding of how a medieval or faux medieval economy actually worked. They have no understanding of how medieval era type farming actually worked. Probably no understanding of how trade actually worked. And yeah, you just get people who apparently have no visible means of support who are able to just go off on a quest, despite apparently being, you know, like orphan farm boys or something. It doesn't happen. That's not the thing.
Unless you're begging on the road, which is a different kind of job, I guess. Yeah, but you have to get your supplies.
People have all sorts of ways of making a living. I remember once when I was running an FRP campaign, notorious, of course, for also not having characters with jobs, and somebody actually took the skills of flint napping so that they could actually make flints and tools and things. This is a fairly comparatively primitive technology thing, but yeah, they because they understood that you needed a job, you needed a way to make a living, you needed to be able to trade or barter something, depending what your economy was based on, whether it's financial or a barter economy. You have to be able to produce and do something, and most fantasy heroes, whether they be in games or in fiction, tend not to actually have, any visible means of support.
Yeah. I have noticed, though, that in we've been playing Pathfinder with my family, and they actually have ways of giving you like a job and things you can do and make and stuff, And I was like, when I was designing a character, it's a Tengu character. Gee, I really love Tengu characters. And I was like, well, let's see what I can do. And then it was like, well, I can make swords. That sounds like a really good idea. That way my sword can be way cheaper, and I can also make some swords if need be and sell them to people.
Forge.
I'm an arms dealer.
Well, and I was thinking at the opposite extreme, I've seen science fiction novels where, everything's done by automation and robots. And,
oh, right. Good point.
Oh my God, yeah, like the
but I
Jetsons.
still kind of wonder at the underlying economy of it.
Yeah.
Well, a few more years, we're going to start finding that out, because so many more jobs are going to be at threat from automation. I mean, the driverless cars that Google are still testing around Mountain View and the rest of the Bay Area. How long do we think taxis and drivers of freight trucks are going to have jobs in the future? Why have a taxi when a driverless car will come to your door, pick you up, take you somewhere, and drop you off wherever you want? What's the purpose of having humans?
There's also, actually, I'm going to recommend Paul Carlson's stories from Analog, because Paul Carlson is a truck driver, and he's written some really interesting stories about robots moving into the trucking business.
Oh, I read those.
I mean, it's a really unique perspective, so I highly recommend it. And I'm going to have to... yeah, well, we'll do the research for the report, I'm afraid, because I can't go running off and try to find it. But anyway, so Paul Carlson has his trucking robot series in Analog, and that's definitely asking some interesting questions, like, if you had robots working in trucking, would people trust them, and how would that work? And in fact, in his scenario, you've got the driver, who's actually a human being, but then you've got the co-driver, co-loader, who's a robot, and the truck itself is an AI, which is, I thought, really, there's just a lot of fun stuff about it. He asked some really realistic questions about the roles of people and robots and machines in that scenario. So I thought that was really, really fascinating. Yeah, and also, okay, so let's go back to our idea of filling in a world with people who have jobs. You often find people just finding stuff conveniently. We have found some stuff. And, well, I mean, I think, so for example, if you're looking at The Hobbit, they come across the trolls, and the trolls have got these really fancy swords. I mean, the great part about that is they need some. It'd be nice for them to have some swords, and it's plausible that these trolls would have taken these swords off of other people. But you'd have to, I mean, where do you find a specialty sword, right? Like, they can't be all that easy to find, right?
Here, wait.
In this case, it was like, whoa, how did these trolls get these cool swords? Well, moving on, right? They must have stolen them from somebody.
Me!
Right?
Took my sword.
Yeah. Actually, Che put up in the chat bar the question: with a large idle population, would the economy collapse? That's a question I've actually seen answered in science fiction in a couple of places, but not, or I wouldn't say answered, but like discussed at least in fiction.
It's going to depend on the level of socialism to some extent in your society. A capitalist society cannot survive with a large number of, a high proportion, like 40, 50, 80, whatever percent of unemployed idle people, because they have no means of support, and they will just end up turning into roaming mobs and stealing everything off everyone else.
Yeah.
If you have a more socialist level of society, then they are geared up to the fact that the output from the social system, the government, whatever, to individuals is not necessarily directly dependent on their level of contribution in a work context.
Mm-hmm.
There is an argument to that as material becomes more plentiful and as more and more jobs can be done in an automated basis, societies should move to a more socialist stroke communist model. Although I'm sure that might not go down well in this country.
Doubtless. Okay, so let's see if we can think of some people who had jobs that made sense in books that we've read. There are a lot of people who were leaders of various varieties, which begs the question: if they go off on a quest, or if they have stuff to do and get called away, is there a system of support, or do you have a gap in the power structure? I know in the 100,000 Kingdoms, Yena was in a governmental position, but there was a way for them. There was a system in her land that would fill that government position if she left, which she then, of course, did. Yeah, and she had other means of support while she was on her way. Let's see. Well, when you're in the medieval zone, you get a lot of smithing. You don't get too much. I mean, I've seen leather working, and I've seen several different kinds of things.
Well, always your basic farmers.
Farmers, yeah.
I think for book-wise, people go for the sexy jobs like assassin.
Assassin. What are you showing us, Brian?
I'm on helpful book mode again. And it doesn't come out well on the thing. This is a book called Making a Living in the Middle Ages. The People of Britain, 850 to 1250 by Christopher Dyer. It's an extremely handy reference book if you want to, for instance, have some kind of medieval economy and understand who contributes to it in what ways.
Yeah, sounds like a book.
It has stuff. It covers the aristocracy, peasants, towns, commerce, various trade and jobs, and so forth. So that is the sort of thing that makes you realize how bad most epic fantasy is.
Yes.
And then if you want more detail on specific jobs, this book is called English Medieval Industries, and it will go into the details of all the different kinds of industries, such as marble, carving marble and stone, copper alloys, gold, silver, precious stones, iron, pottery, tilework, brick, glass, both vessel glass and window glass, and so on and so forth. These are the sorts of things that I like, because I'm sad that way.
It's good research, and also we need to also do research into more diverse areas of the world than just Britain in the Middle Ages, obviously.
Absolutely.
So research is definitely suggested. I have a ton of books on Japanese history. None of them are in my room at this time, so I'm not going to be able to flash them at you.
You just don't do your hangouts from the right room. You've got to be in range of your massive wall of bookshelves over here. That's how I work here. That's why I sit at this desk.
Well, I mean, I think that you can learn a lot from pretty basic historical books on Japan. I mean, all you need to do is Google, and you can learn a lot. I mean, there's the Japanese caste system, which was the inspiration for my foreign caste system, and that is very, very much entangled with jobs. My son is actually studying the Indian caste system, and that is linked to jobs in some sense as well. So, caste systems is not what we're talking about today, and that's an added complication. However, if you have a caste system that's linked to jobs, it does kind of help you to figure out what jobs people have to do. But I do often have to slow down with my writing and say, okay, my person needs to get X. Where are they going to go to get it? The current one that I'm writing is I have 2 girls and they have to go get some clothes because they have to be able to go to a nice neighborhood and they don't have nice enough clothes to go to the nice neighborhood. So I have to know who's running the store, what kind of stuff they have in the store, what kind of clientele they have, and in fact, while they're there, they get told off by the shop man because he thinks they're not being respectful enough and having enough pride in their caste that they're not properly dressed to be in his shop, despite the fact that they are, as well dressed as they can manage, right? But when you get into these situations, it's worth thinking through, so who is this shop guy, and what's his role in the community, and where does he get all of his stuff, and how does he view his clientele, especially since these girls are at the lowest social status that they could possibly be for actually going into this shop. They happen to be at the same caste level as the shop man himself, but he's a little biased towards his richer customers, right? So he doesn't have a lot of time. I mean, he starts giving them a lecture, but his lecture basically lasts only as long as they're the only ones in line. And the minute that a higher caste person shows up behind them, he's like, "Fine, take your stuff, leave. Hi, sir, how can I help you?" So, so those little interactions are really important, and knowing a little bit about how a person in that situation would view their job, how important they would consider their job, is really valuable.
Well, I had been thinking, and which ties in here, is the cultural meaning of job, and how much of people's identities tied up in their job versus other markers like family or what they do in their leisure time or...
Yep. And yeah, that's a really, really good issue to bring up, Glenda. Thank you for mentioning it, because that's going to vary widely, right? Yes. It's also going to vary between genders. In different countries, it might be vastly different. The kinds of things that need to happen in different countries may be vastly different.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, how do you get a job? Right?
Yeah.
It's land on your head. Well, it's, so-and-so's son or daughter, and therefore we are going to be making it this way, and that's how it's going to work. It's a hereditary thing. Or...
Apprenticeships were the standard way for a very, very long time of getting into a job. You started as a child, started maybe 7 or 8 years old. If your family had a business, you'd apprentice to your parents. If they didn't have a business, they would have connections. They would apprentice you to a guild or whatever. Your job would normally be chosen for you before you were 10 years old. Again, we're going back to medieval and Renaissance kind of times, but.
Yeah,
that was a common thing. You didn't get any choice. You didn't have any job mobility. That's a comparatively modern concept, because it comes with a corporation, and that's a comparatively modern concept.
Yeah, Also, modern concepts like, 8 hours of work per day, or a weekend, or that sort of thing.
Child
Most,
labor
yeah,
laws.
most of
Child
those are
labor,
inventions by those terrible union things
Yeah.
that people hate so much.
yeah.
Some things, I mean, weekends did exist because you had Sunday off because that was when you could go and pray. But
Exactly.
the rest of the time
Yeah.
you worked.
When my mother was very young, she worked 9 hours a day, 6 days a week.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, I do think that's interesting in terms of world building. Going back to there were two things that really interested me, and that were like the issues of unions and child labor laws, and the leisure. Like because I mean, if you think about it, as writers, what we're doing is the leisure workplace in a sense. I mean, we are writing to inform and entertain and make people think. But how that would work in the world, like let's suggest there's a world and literacy is not a big thing, and so let's say we're doing a medieval setting, maybe there's puppetry and bards. But I think that that's an interesting thing to consider.
If you're in a subsistence economy, there's not going to be a lot of room for extra stuff.
Right.
Everybody's just going to be very focused on how the heck do I stay alive and make sure I'm fed and all that. Though obviously there are critical roles. I would say, like the priest of a town be a very critical role, and that's one of the ones that would sort of receive support from everybody in the community because they had a valuable role that wasn't just making sure that everybody had food on their table.
Yeah. Well, and that's where the roots of trade go back to, just in the individual community. You might have one person who's a very skilled flint napper, but really lousy as honey. So he makes arrows, heads, and spearheads for everyone else, and in return they give him a share of their kill.
Yeah, almost as soon as you're living in groups larger than a single family social group, you will start to get some kind of that specialization. People are bright enough to realize who's good at things and who's not, and that the group as a whole needs these things. You don't try and no, everybody will spend X amount of hours doing this and Y amount of hours doing that, even though one guy can't nap a flint to save his life and the other can't see to throw a spear at the deer that just ran past my window.
Right.
So yeah, it is. That's the roots of economy. It starts with barter, and as the societies get bigger, it moves to, well, you need some form of intermediary of exchange, and that's when money gets invented.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, payment in money is also, by no means universal throughout history. And even when it was, the company stores came into existence. So yes, we will pay you money. You now have to spend it at the company store, so we get all the money back again. There are places near here. There's an old mining town, 50 miles or so north of here, that still has, all the old books and documentation, and you can see exactly how much people are getting paid, and then you can see exactly how much they are paying the company store back in turn, and it's their whole salaries going back in. So, they're no different from being indentured servants. In theory, they have money. In practice, there is only one outlet for that money and one input for their commodities.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Great. Let's talk about plausible jobs for main characters.
Assassin?
Yeah. You see that so much.
I know. Assassin annoys the hell out of me. It's one of those fantasy cliches that I'm just like, no, stop it now.
Yeah.
How many people in history have had jobs as assassins?
I know.
I know. There's really not a lot of demand for it. If there was, we'd just run out of people. I mean, how many people does an assassin have to kill every year? you know, to make a living. And then you start working out, well, how many people, you know, are like being able to replace all these people that the assassins are killing.
Population.
It doesn't work.
You'd have to have like a day job, and assassin would be your hobby.
Oh my god.
What?
The assassin who works at the seafood counter.
Well, yeah, you just serve people fugu. That'll work every time, won't it?
Right.
Yeah, so also you see thief around the place quite a bit.
Oh
yeah.
my god, all the
Yeah,
time.
thieves guilds, like, not a real thing, dude.
Oh my god.
I mean, bandits were a thing.
Bandits are a complete, yeah, absolutely. It depends on your level of you know, law enforcement availability and who's paying for that law enforcement, because it's all, you know, private, pretty much. It's yeah, post times of conflict, wars, revolutions, etc. There's a lot of unemployed soldiers. They may, you know, what are they going to do to turn to find a way of making a living?
Oh yes, and pirates. Jay, you're on a roll.
I know. Oh, I'm so tired of pirates too.
Pirates are a thing, but often a very badly done thing.
But
Yeah, I know.
My kids are watching One Piece. You heard of this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody and their brother and their dog is a pirate. It's like, you can't run an economy on only pirates.
Yes, everyone just steals from everyone else, but no one's actually producing anything. So if they're actually consuming stuff, everyone runs out after about a week.
Or heaven forbid something actually get destroyed in the act of being pirated.
Oh god, so much gets destroyed in One Piece too. It's ridiculous.
Somebody somewhere is shipbuilding like mad to replace all these ships that the pirates are sinking. And it's just like, there's a ship coming off the production line and bam, the pirates have sunk it before you know it. And the guy's going, why exactly am I doing this? Why don't I go off and become a pirate too?
I think what you end up with is this sort of bizarrely accelerated timeline, right? Because pirates, or you know, it's the thing where, okay, so people get into this mindset from, I guess, from video games or from narratives or whatever, where
TV
people
and
have to
movies.
be battling all the time, right? And if they're battling, it means they have to kill the enemy or something, right? When, if you look at the way that animals interact with each other in a natural environment, animals fight, but only when they have to, first of all.
Yeah.
And then usually not to kill the other animal, but just to say, hey, this is my space, this is my stuff, whatever. Don't bug me, right? So, you know, I don't know where this narrative expectation for you know, slash and burn approaches to everything came from, but it's way too yeah, it's just way overdone. Like, you know, even if you were a pirate, you were going to spend some time repairing your ship and making a plan and spying to find out where the latest merchant ships might be, or you know, other stuff.
That's what montages are for, though, isn't it? Do a little montage.
Yeah.
It's montage time.
Oh my gosh.
I think a lot of like fantasies, ideas of jobs do come from like TV and movies and stuff we watch. I mean, you know that like Ghost Hunter is legit now. You know, I mean,
yeah. What's the perks on that like? I mean, you know, what's the 401k? Do you get dental? What? I don't know.
I know.
It's off subject, but I got in a horrible argument with someone online who wanted to know all about the natural history of vampires. You know, we were talking about real creatures, real animals, and she brings up vampires and wants to know, well, you know, exactly how do they do this and how do they do that? And I was like, they're fantasy.
Well, like, oh my god. You mean
What?
like they
No,
thought that
don't say that.
that's not a job either. Vampire's not a job.
Oh, I'm so putting that on my. Next time I do a resume, I'm going to put in a couple of years, and then there were the 2 years I spent as a professional vampire. Yeah.
Sweet.
But it didn't work out,
Okay, so we've made a list of our pet peeve jobs. Are there any pet peeve jobs remaining?
Spaceship captain.
What?
Wait,
What did
which?
you
Spaceship captain.
Spaceship captain.
Spaceship captain.
That's like every I mean, oh my god. Everybody's always. I blame Firefly. No, I should probably blame Star Trek. But, oh my
Firefly has made that.
god.
Yes,
Oh,
I'm
yes.
going to just have my own little spaceship, and I'm going to fly around. And well, I mean that dates back to Star Wars and Harrison Ford,
Yeah.
flying his little smuggling ship.
Yeah.
But we never actually saw him smuggle anything
No.
at all.
No.
But he's a
Oh, no,
smuggler, which is
He did
kind of
go
like
so
a
far
pirate
as
light.
to say that he had compartments for smuggling. So let's be fair
Yeah.
there.
Yeah,
He did.
that's true. And they used him once. So.
But
Yeah,
then you
and
also
I
have
know.
that,
But at least
if
they
you've
didn't
got a smuggling, how does a
use
smuggling
none.
economy work? You have to, for smuggling to make sense, you have to have, taxes, import duties, whatever that you're avoiding. So again, you
that was the
tied
first
into an
3
economy.
movies.
Well, I've read stories.
No,
where
there is no
traders-
first 3 movies. They never happen.
Yes. I am so
I've read
with you on
stories
that.
with traders where what's legitimate merchandise in one star system is smuggled contraband in the next, and so they have to juggle carefully what cargo is where.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, so I guess what we're talking about right now is there are these things that people do in order to keep their lives going that make sense, but they have to make sense in a context.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
And if you don't have the supporting context, so I guess all we're saying is that if you want to have somebody be an assassin or a pirate, that you got to be thinking through that backstory like crazy, right? To just make sure that you understand why they're a pirate or an assassin or whatever it is, so that has some kind of grounding. Otherwise, it's like, this is ostensibly my job, but it doesn't make any sense because, well, I've been dropped here by aliens or something.
Or it just exists for the purpose of having the plot in the book.
Yeah.
Well, exactly. Dropped here by the
yeah.
author is really what it is.
Yeah.
Who is an alien to the world, so there we are.
Who told you?
Yeah, so I guess because I write in Varan, I have to think through jobs a lot. And I have to think through how those functions are different. Like, I mean, who gets allowed to do what is really different in Varan. So I have to be very careful and say, well, okay, and I was mentioning a solar engineer. In the woman behind him in line in the shop is a solar engineer, and she's only a solar engineer because this is the town where all the solar engineers will live, and I have to kind of imply that that's a thing, right? Okay, so she's a solar engineer, and okay, she would have sun marks on her face because everybody's living underground, and if you're a solar engineer, you're going to be not living underground all the time. Which brings me to the effects that jobs have on people.
Yeah.
Somebody who's worked as a smith their entire life is gonna show it in their hands, in their musculature, in their smoke inhalation effects. don't just, give us these incredibly beautiful people who've had nothing but leisure time their entire lives and then try to tell us that they've been working hard in the fields for most of their lives. What you do changes your body in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
Farmer tan.
Absolutely. The tan used to be a sign. I mean, the rich and noble used to try and be as pale and creamy white as possible because it showed that they didn't have to go outside to work in the fields.
Exactly.
And then, middle of last century, it suddenly became fashionable to show that you had enough leisure time to go and enjoy yourself in the sun and develop a tan and it's made around.
In factories where they would be indoors all day.
Yeah, factories.
Yep. So yes, the complete switch around. But a lot of those fashions are driven by what the rich want to look like, and then poor people want to look like the rich people, and so the rich people have to change their fashions again to stop those horrible poor people from catching up with them.
Those horrible poor people.
It's a technical term.
What? Let's dig a little bit into this concept of poor people because there is a lot of misconception in our world about whether poor people have jobs. Mm-hmm. And many, 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 many poor people have jobs.
Yes.
They're just not very good jobs.
They just don't pay much.
So you don't want to just sort of say, well, I'm going to sprinkle some quaint poor people into the street, right?
Bit of local colour.
Yeah, the village idiot, and I don't know, like for a long time.
That's a job, right? You get paid to be a village idiot, don't you?
I thought it was the job when I was a kid, and I was, was reading. I
don't think you always have one. It must be,
I thought it was a job.
It's a popular appointment, There's a lot of competition for that.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think that's a really good, and there's no better place in SF&F genre fiction than to kind of explore these issues of perceptions of different marginalized groups, and people living within a certain economic bracket is one of those. I live well below poverty level, and I'm able to do that and continue to write because I live with my folks right now, and I have a university degree. I have had a career in broadcasting. I did pretty well there. And if I wanted to live on my own right now, I would probably have to have 2 or 3 jobs, and that is even if I was working in broadcasting in the area that I'm in. You have to make real money. You have to be in a big city. And I am not. I am on a mountain. And I think that is analogous to probably most people's experiences in the U.S. at this point. And then you have, obviously different levels of poverty within the poverty brackets and different circumstances within that. And all of that is really intriguing. And I think worth exploring in an SF&F context.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad I asked that question. No, seriously, it was like it didn't come up until somebody said poor people, and I was like, yeah, that's kind of important, Yeah. But yeah, you can be poor for all kinds of reasons. I mean, look at the musicians, right? Artists and musicians have been poor for hundreds of years, right? And there was a patronage system that supported them at a given time. But if you fell out of that, boy, you were in trouble, because who was going to buy your symphonies, right?
You basically, as an artist, up until around the early half of the 19th century, you basically only produced what people paid you to produce. You did not come up with your own work as an artist. There was just no such concept of a market. I mean, I recently did a course on the Renaissance, including a lot of stuff about Renaissance art, and I actually looked into and tracked down actual contracts of work that were given to, our great masters of the Renaissance, and they were told exactly what to paint, exactly what colors they should use, what canvas size, what the subject should be. The precise details would vary. Some were given more leeway than others. But those great paintings of history were exactly what the patrons told them to paint. In many cases, they were repainted. You can see with the X-rays and so forth, early drafts of a painting, and then the final version. And somebody posted up, and I can't remember where I saw it, but fairly recently, a young Artemisia Gentileschi painting, her first painting of Judith and Holofernes. No, not Judith and Holofernes. It was the Susanna and the Elders.
Yeah,
and
that was
the original painting that she first does has Susanna is there. She's basically, she's screaming. It almost looks like, Edvard Munch's The Scream. She's really got this expression of complete and total horror on her face. The final version doesn't have that, and you can bet that the reason the final version doesn't have that is that the person who wanted the painting didn't like the look of that expression. She didn't, that was totally unpopular. It was like, no, you will repaint this. You will make this the soft porn biblical painting that I actually asked for, because that's what Susanna and the Elders was always the big soft porn biblical painting that everyone wanted. And to actually depict, the woman as being uncomfortable in that position just wasn't what the patron wanted.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, okay. Other things. People who are specialists. People who are specialists and highly educated. I was thinking maybe we should talk about the education. I'll branch a little bit into, like, if you're a specialist, what kind of education you might need to have had, because it doesn't get addressed all the time.
Well, if you're a specialist assassin, you can have.
Here we go.
You have an old mentor assassin, and then your mentor goes into retirement, and then you start doing bad things, and the mentor has to come out of retirement and hunt you down, and something like that. Yep. There's about 87 movies on the theme. So.
Right?
Yeah.
No, I'm actually thinking about, so there are scholars, right?
Yeah.
And the thing I most often see is scholars, I guess in science fiction and fantasy, what I most often see is scholars who come up through the same institution and then end up teaching at that institution.
Yeah.
Though that's not what happens in our world. There isn't enough room for everybody to end up teaching at their own institution.
Yes.
Well, if it's like Harry Potter and you've only got one, there are fairly limited job options.
Yeah, exactly. Like what?
Like you jobs are there? You're unemployed. I don't even. Oh my god.
Everybody else has got to do other stuff,
Yep.
Hermione's lucky her parents are dentists. They got a job.
Yeah.
Because that's like the Harry Potter, where like every single person who works at Hogwarts went to Hogwarts, and then they even continued it where, like, in the little epilogue, at least according to the movie, where like, or somebody told me, I didn't read the final like 3 or 4 books. Neville ends up as botany professor, like, in the future, so it's like, yeah, and you know what? Wizards never freaking die either. So it's like, I don't know how he got, I don't know, like, eventually, like, Professor Sprout died eventually or something. Oh my god, but I mean, waiting for tenure there must be hell.
Well, I suspect that you just, have to kill off your predecessor, don't you? You just.
That would be sweet.
I need tenure. I need your job. I will now kill you. It's like, seems perfectly reasonable.
That's how Unseen University used to work, man.
Yeah.
That's true. That's true. Well, and you know what? There are some places in the world where you're not allowed to get, what was it? You're not allowed to get a PhD. is it a PhD or? No, I think it must be a professorship. You're not allowed to get a professorship unless one of the existing professors dies.
Yeah.
I mean, literally.
Wow.
I think we heard about that in Japan somewhere, where there was a school that would like, you just couldn't get a job there because you had to wait until there was like an obituary slot open. It was pretty like, really? That's how you're gonna work it? Okay. Yeah, I mean that was really eye-opening.
Yeah. I wanted to go back to this question of education and specialization, and in terms of again back to like the world building issue, what that even entails, because in terms of world building, it's kind of wide open. Like when you talk about education, like our understanding of it is like this notion of the ivory tower and book learning, right? But then you have other sorts of education where you learn a trade or skill.
Right.
And then there is different perceptions and values placed on, I guess, a sort of like elite hierarchy about which of those things have value on paper versus now which ones have value in the real world and how that translates into the workplace.
Yeah.
If that made sense.
Mm-hmm.
What do you guys think?
Well, one of, I don't know, just an idle thought was that, it hasn't been all terribly that long ago that there weren't law schools. Lawyers basically, they just went to work for a lawyer and they read law with a mentor, basically, in order to become a lawyer. And
yeah. So if you don't mind me going on a little bit about something, I wanted to bring up the idea of a character that I created, and back when I created him, he had this very, very special job and had all these kind of super powery things about the way he did his job. This is the character of Zinta, who is a servant in my Varan world, and when I first wrote him, he was just doing stuff, but he was like ultra super graceful about it, and he was like, and he had all these skills of things that he could do, and I was like, if he's gonna have superpowers like this, he's got to have learned them somewhere, because he's not a superhero. He is a guy. And it was from that I sort of backformed the Embati Academy, which is actually a really specialized institution. And one of the things that's kind of weird about Varan is that each caste is educated in a completely different way, in a completely different context. Spending a lot of money to go to school for 8 years and become a super butler. Awesome, Jay. Yeah, but what's fun about this is, okay, so when I really sat down and thought about it, I was like, okay, so are these just valets? Are they just super butlers? But really they're not. So I decided that the ones who work for the men are actually specialists in history and politics and law, and they become sort of like advisors and almost like vice whatever the other person is, helping them get their job done and helping them be more informed about basically everything. In addition to that, they're also bodyguards, right? And so the list of things, the ones who work for the women actually have medical training, because there's this value placed in the nobility on keeping the women healthy so that they can have lots of babies, which is for demographic reasons. But anyway, so they have this very specific training. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to have to back design all this stuff, because I've created these incredibly specialist jobs where people have these weird combinations of skills. And so basically I went back, created the academy, and then I started realizing, well, okay, so you basically go through your whole schooling. So you start at age 6, and you start by learning things like, you know, grace and posture and gymnastics and stuff until you're about 12. And then when you're 12, you have to decide whether you're going to be a manservant or a ladyservant. And you pick a specialization, and from there it changes what you study. And you basically go on and you study all this stuff until you're 19 years old. And it's at that point that you get your certification and you're available to work for the nobility. The other thing, of course, that I ran into was that there aren't a lot of jobs with the nobility because the nobility are in decline, right? And yeah, you know, there are people who get fired from their jobs and all this kind of stuff, but I'm starting to think, well, okay, you've got to have backup options for these people, because what if they don't get this job that they've been training for their whole lives? They do have a lot of specialized skills, so they're going to have to move into something where they can use those skills. So the gentlemen's servants will tend to move into law. They'll work in the courts. The ladies' servants, I haven't actually thought through what they do if they don't get the job. Thing for me to go and work on. but the point,
sort of like,
was that there was
to get married or go to a nunnery. Isn't that the standard options if you don't get to be a maidservant? I think that's, or a barmaid.
No.
Sorry, yes,
Well,
barmaid. There are certain jobs in fantasy for women, you know.
I will specify, however, that the ones who go to become servants for women are not all women.
Yeah.
So you can be male or female and work for a male or a female. So it's not quite like your only option would be able to be going to a nunnery if you didn't get the
a
job.
monastery then.
well, like you said, they have like doctor and medical skills. That's always useful.
Yeah, and they can work. I mean, they can work as teachers of other students, or they can help out. I'm sure they can be helpers in medical circumstances.
Clinic, nurses, hospitals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's usually something for people of a lower caste, but I agree. I got to think it through. But you know what? So you've got to have backups for people.
You can also have multiple servants working for one individual. I mean, you could have the senior person who's the primary one, but you could also have a couple of younger, like trainee people.
Large noble houses, like in England, you would have a big staff of possibly 20, 25.
That's the other option that I hadn't mentioned yet, which is the household.
Yeah.
It's called the household, and you basically move into the household. The other thing that I thought of is that there are some people who need more care, right? Some people who need 24-hour care. So they would need more than just one servant for that, and so that would be a really viable option for somebody who wasn't able to
inbred
be
kid
the primary servant. Sorry, Che, what were we saying?
People, so you need them to take care of their mutant inbred kids.
Yes, and we're not kidding on that.
Yeah.
So. I know who you're thinking of, Juliet.
Sorry?
I said I know who you're thinking of, and I'm not going to say it. Spoiler.
Oh, yeah. I got some disabled people in my book.
Yeah.
Well, even ordinary child care.
What?
Ordinary child care.
Ordinary child care.
Noble children, even the healthy, normal noble children, have to be cared for.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Taught and
there is school. So school for the nobles is separate from that, but
the little ones.
Yeah, there is a caretaking kind of job, and actually So this would be another place that they would go. Is that the job of caretaker is actually for the children of the manservants who are constantly on duty, right?
Oh.
Because when you're in this job where you're constantly beholden to a noble master or whatever, you work it out what your hours are and everything else. But while you're at work, you know, what do you do if you have children? Because there is nothing that says, well, you have to have a housewife at home, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so there's definitely caretaker positions for that. Cool. Well, so we've covered a ton, and you guys have answered my question for me, which is great. I'm glad that I hadn't really thought about the career paths for people who hadn't gone into ladies training, but at the same time, it's nice to know that I had spots there that they could actually hit. Any, I don't know, questions, other things that we may need to mention? Is wench a job? Oh, yes, cavern wench. Oh my gosh.
There's a guild, isn't there?
The wench
The wenches guild. I'm sure there's a guild.
Guild. Totally.
And there's
my
like
gosh.
a guild like how many ass pinches they have to tolerate before
Oh,
they kiss her. No.
That's how they get experience points. You know, get your ass grabbed enough times and you level up. That is totally how it happens.
oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah, I
yes.
know.
Someone needs to write this. Like, just put down like the D&D rules for the wench guild.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, and on that note, I think I'm going to stop the broadcast because we're out of time, and life is getting very silly. It's like, you know, it's like the way they end the skits in Monty Python. This is getting too silly. Anyway, thank you all for coming. I really enjoyed the discussion. I don't have a topic for next week yet, but I think we'll come up with one. Brian, are you aware that that Worldbuild Dive is now on Twitter?
That puts one up on me because I don't really use my Twitter account. But no, I wasn't aware.
Saying so, I put out the announcements through Twitter as well as my other venues at this point. So
Okay.
just so you know.
But I mostly
and
find out
might be
through
watching
Facebook,
the
which
video.
is erratic, but usually.
So for people who might be watching the video, the Twitter handle is @WorldbuildDive, and so if you want to have announcements about topics or ask me questions or various things, that's the place to do it. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to stop the broadcast, and we'll see you probably next week. Oh, also, last thing. I'm going to have Harry Markov. Haralambi Markov is going to be our guest in February, and I'm very excited about that. And I will make sure that I remind you of the dates as we go forward. But I'm excited to talk to him. He's going to be coming and talking to us about a story he has going up at Tor.com. So it'll be very, very cool. All right.